All right, picture this: Tudor England. The kind of place where a single sentence could either elevate you to royal favor or get you tied to a stake in front of half of London. Now, imagine a young woman, not a queen, not a duchess, not anyone with a shield of noble privilege, just one educated landowner's daughter with enough fire in her voice to shake the foundations of the king's church. That was Anne Askew. She wasn't meek. She wasn't quiet. She didn't even pretend to play by the rules. While most women in the 1500s were expected to sew, obey, and stay silent, Anne was out here quoting scripture, questioning doctrine, and publicly rejecting one of the core beliefs of Catholic England. And this wasn't a private whisper in a chapel corner. She said it loud enough for bishops and chancellors to hear her, loud enough for the king's men to drag her away. What followed wasn't just a trial, it was a political hunt, one that led her into the Tower of London, onto the rack, and ultimately to a burning pyre in Smithfield, where the crowd watched history happen right in front of them. She walked into the heart of the Tudor machine, knowing damn well it could kill her, and she spoke anyway. This is the story of a woman who faced torture with a spine of steel, who refused to break even when her body literally did, and whose final breath still echoes through history like a challenge.
All right, so here's the deal. Anne Askew wasn't born into the kind of life that screams rebel right out of the gate. She came into the world in 1521, the daughter of Sir William Askew, a Lincolnshire landowner who had the kind of loyalty to the crown that usually meant keeping your head down and your opinions to yourself. But Anne? She had other plans. While most girls her age were being trained in needlework and etiquette, Anne was learning to read, to think, and to question, a rarity in an era when female education barely existed beyond the basics. But here's what's next-level crazy. Anne didn't treat her education like a trophy. Nope. For her, knowledge wasn't just power, it was a weapon. And she wielded it with precision. By the time she hit adulthood, she wasn't content with quietly practicing her faith. She was publicly dissecting it. She challenged the core of Catholic doctrine, especially the idea of transubstantiation, the belief that bread and wine literally became Christ's body and blood during the Eucharist. In 1539, under Henry VIII's brutal Act of 6 Articles, even questioning this could get you killed. And yet, Anne didn't flinch. She wasn't some reckless teenager spouting opinions. She was deliberate, sharp, and fearless. During one of her examinations, she famously said, "I would rather read 5 lines in the Bible than hear 5 masses in the church." Can you imagine saying that in front of powerful men who could and would destroy your life for it? Her words weren't just rebellious. They were a direct challenge to the crown's religious authority. And that's exactly what made her dangerous in the eyes of the monarchy. So she's educated, articulate, and bold as hell, but she's also stepping straight into a minefield. And that's when things start spiraling. By the mid-1440s, her preaching in London had gained serious attention. She wasn't just talking to a handful of believers. Her ideas were spreading, convincing people, and threatening those who wanted to keep absolute control over religion in England. Here's where it gets wild. Anne's defiance wasn't just theological, it was political. By questioning religious doctrine, she was challenging the king himself. And that's a road that has no return in Tudor England.
So, picking up where we left off, Anne Askew isn't just some outspoken woman in London. By 1545, she had become a lightning rod for some of the most powerful men in Henry VIII's court. Bishop Stephen Gardiner and Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley weren't your average bureaucrats. They were iron-fisted defenders of Catholic doctrine, and they viewed Anne not as a misguided soul, but as an outright threat. Her words, her preaching, even her questions were shaking the foundations of the king's religious settlement. And in Tudor England, shaking the foundations of the king's church was basically shaking the throne itself. Now here's the kicker. Anne wasn't just arguing with clergy. She was tangling with politics at the highest level. Around the same time, Queen Catherine Parr, Henry's 6th wife, had a reputation for sympathizing with Protestant ideas. Anne's open questioning of Catholic beliefs made the crown suspicious that she might have connections to the Queen's circle, and in a court fueled by paranoia, even a whisper could turn lethal. Anne was arrested once, interrogated, and then released, but it didn't end there. Nope, the men in power wanted to send a message. They wanted her silenced. And that meant this wasn't just about her faith anymore. This was about control, about power, and about making an example of anyone who dared challenge the status quo. John Bale, a Protestant chronicler, captured her essence perfectly when he wrote that Anne was a virgin not only pure and undefiled in body, but also a pure virgin in the faith of Christ. That's not just a compliment. It's a warning. Her conviction was unshakable, and that purity of faith made her a target for the harshest methods the state could muster. And that's when the real horror begins, because the next chapter of her story takes us straight into the Tower of London, where Anne faced one of the most feared instruments of torture in Tudor England, the rack.
All right, hold up. This is where things get absolutely harrowing. Anne Askew had already been condemned for heresy, but her interrogators weren't done. They weren't interested in her personal beliefs anymore. They wanted names. They wanted to know who else might share her Protestant leanings, maybe even people close to the Queen herself. And to get that, they dragged her into the Tower of London's stone chambers, straight into the shadow of the rack. Now, the rack wasn't just some medieval torture prop. It was a device designed to painfully stretch the body to the point where joints could be violently dislocated. Rarely used on women, and almost never with political intent this direct, it was a weapon of both pain and intimidation. Anne was bound by her wrists and ankles, and as Rothsey and Sir Richard Rich turned the wheels themselves, her body was stretched until her shoulders and hips were torn. She later wrote, according to chronicler John Bale, "They did put me on the rack because I confessed no ladies or gentlewomen to be of my opinion, until the strength in my arms and legs was completely destroyed." Here's the insane part. Anne gave them nothing. Not a single name, not a hint, not a whisper of betrayal. Despite her body being mutilated beyond recognition, her resolve remained unbroken. She literally became a living testament to faith under fire. Torture, technically illegal without royal consent, had become a shadow instrument of Tudor authority, and Anne's case showed just how far it could stretch the law when political necessity demanded it. By the time they were done, Anne could no longer walk. She was carried back to her cell broken and barely alive, and yet the court wasn't finished. The final act, the one that would etch her name into history, was still waiting, a public execution designed to silence her voice once and for all. But here's where it gets completely wild. Anne's execution wouldn't just be brutal, it would be historic, horrifying, and unforgettable.
So now we get to Smithfield, July 16th, 1546. Picture it, a sea of people in London, nobles, clergy, merchants, and commoners, all craning their necks to watch history unfold. Anne Askew, weakened from torture, couldn't even walk. They carried her in a chair to the stake, her body wrecked, but her spirit unshaken. The Tower's horrors had left her broken, but they hadn't broken her resolve. Anne wasn't alone. 3 men, John Lascelles, John Hadlam, and John Hemley, shared the same grim fate, but all eyes were on Anne. She became the first English woman known to be both tortured in the Tower and burned at the stake, and that fact alone made her execution headline-worthy even before the flames began. Her story had already spread in whispers through London, building anticipation and fear, and now the culmination, the public, deliberate, irreversible act, was about to take place. The executioner stacked bundles of dry wood beneath her, and a small seat was placed to keep her upright. Eyewitnesses recorded her calm demeanor, even in the face of death. She refused to recant, ignored Bishop Nicholas Shaxton's sermon, and remained silent, a defiance that became louder than any words. A bag of gunpowder was tied around her neck to hasten death, a cruel but merciful Tudor tactic, and as the flames were lit, the crowd watched in grim fascination. Here's the mind-blowing part. Tudor burnings weren't hidden or private. They were performative, meant to terrorize the populace and reinforce the state's power. But Anne's courage flipped the script. Her body was frail, her frame nearly destroyed, yet she became a symbol. The fire meant to silence her instead immortalized her, proving that the state could destroy the body, but it could never claim the soul. And here's where the legacy kicks in. Anne Askew's martyrdom didn't vanish in the smoke. Her writings survived, her story spread, and she became an enduring emblem of faith and defiance, challenging the cruelty of the Tudor state long after her death.
So here's the thing. Anne Askew didn't just die at Smithfield. She exploded onto history in a way few women ever have. Her execution, meant to terrify and erase her, ended up creating a legacy that would inspire generations. Her writings, preserved in the examinations of Anne Askew, circulated widely among Protestant reformers. John Fox later immortalized her story in Acts and Monuments, describing her as burned for the testimony of Jesus. Think about it. Her body was destroyed, tortured beyond repair, yet her ideas and courage refused to die. Anne's story became a rallying cry. The state could punish, intimidate, and kill, but it could not crush a steadfast belief. Her refusal to betray others, her silence under torture, and her composed defiance at the stake elevated her from mere heretic to symbol of unbreakable conviction. People across England and Europe heard her story and were inspired to question, to resist, and to hold firm to their faith despite the threat of violent reprisal. Her ordeal also shone a harsh light on Tudor authority. The rack, the public burning, the targeting of potential allies at court, it all revealed the brutality of a regime that prioritized power over justice. Anne's suffering wasn't just personal. It was a public indictment of a government willing to warp the law and inflict extreme cruelty to maintain control. In that sense, she became more than a martyr. She became a mirror reflecting the ruthlessness of the era. And here's the kicker. Centuries later, her courage still resonates. Anne Askew's story asks us a question that's still relevant today. How far would you go to defend your beliefs? What price would you pay for truth when the stakes are life and death? Her words echo across time. I would rather to die than to break my faith. That conviction, unshaken in the face of unimaginable cruelty, is the kind of legacy that refuses to fade.
Picking up from Anne's legacy, it's impossible not to pause and reflect on what she represents. In Tudor England, the line between belief and treason was razor thin. One sentence, one question, one challenge to authority could cost you everything. And yet Anne Askew walked straight into that danger, armed with nothing but her faith and her intellect. She wasn't reckless. She was deliberate. Every word she spoke, every sermon she gave, every defiance in the tower, it was calculated courage. Her story forces us to confront the human cost of conviction. Imagine enduring the rack, knowing it could rip your body apart, knowing the executioner's fire awaited, and still refusing to betray others. That's beyond bravery. It's almost unimaginable. But Anne's experience also exposes the darker side of power, how fear and cruelty can be wielded as tools to control, intimidate, and silence dissent. Tudor England's public burnings were terrifyingly theatrical, designed to leave a lasting mark on the population. Yet Anne turned that very spectacle into proof of her unbroken spirit. Even today, her ordeal resonates. The questions it raises about authority, conscience, and justice aren't just historical. They echo in modern debates about freedom of speech, religious tolerance, and the courage to stand up when the odds are stacked against you. Anne Askew's body may have been consumed by flames, but her story continues to burn in the collective memory, reminding us that one person's unwavering faith can challenge even the harshest systems of power. Her final act, her refusal to compromise, and her endurance under unimaginable suffering turned her from a simple heretic into an enduring symbol. Anne didn't just survive history, she demanded it remember her. And it did. Her voice, once meant to be silenced, became immortal.